The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled Daisy's Diner, a classic American establishment that had stood on the corner of Main Street for 50 years. It was the kind of place where the vinyl seats were cracked but comfortable, and the jukebox still played songs from the 60s. For the lunch rush crowd, it was a sanctuary. But for Chloe, the young black waitress who had been on her feet since 5 a.m., it was a battlefield. Chloe was a single mother working double shifts to save for her daughter's tuition. She moved between tables with the grace of a dancer, balancing plates of pancakes and refilling coffee mugs, her smile never faltering even when her feet screamed in pain. Before we see how a simple cup of coffee changed 3 lives forever, welcome back to her secrets, her stories. We believe that how you treat the person who serves your food tells the world who you really are. If you respect hard work and kindness, please smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and comment, be kind below. Today the peace of the diner was being disturbed by one man in booth 4. Brad, a high-powered real estate broker, treated the booth like his personal office. He had spread his papers all over the table, was shouting into his Bluetooth headset, and snapped his fingers every time he wanted a refill. "I don't care about the zoning laws, Mike," Brad yelled, spraying crumbs of toast on the table. "Just get the eviction notices ready. I'm meeting the owner of the building here in 20 minutes to close the deal. She's some ancient widow, probably doesn't even know what her property is worth. I'm going to buy it cheap and bulldoze this dump." Chloe approached the table with a coffee pot. "More coffee, sir?" she asked politely. Brad didn't even look up. He just shoved his mug toward her without pausing his conversation. "Yeah, keep it coming, and make it actually hot this time." Chloe filled the mug silently and moved on. At the front counter, the bell jingled, signaling a new customer. It was Mrs. Higgins. She was a tiny, frail woman wrapped in a bulky knitted cardigan that looked a few sizes too big. She walked slowly, leaning on the counter for support, her hands shaking as she pulled out a small worn-out coin purse. She looked at the menu board above the grill, squinting through her thick glasses. Chloe immediately went to greet her. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Sit anywhere you like. Can I get you started with some water?" Mrs. Higgins offered a shy, apologetic smile. "Oh, hello, dear. I am just checking the prices. It's been a while." She opened her purse and started counting out pennies and nickels onto the counter, her fingers stiff with arthritis. 1250, dear. Is the tomato soup still $3? Chloe looked at the menu. Inflation had hit hard. The soup was now $6. But, looking at the pile of copper coins on the counter and the hungry look in the old woman's eyes, Chloe didn't have the heart to say it. "Actually," Chloe lied smoothly, "we have a special today for seniors. The soup is on the house if you buy a toast." Mrs. Higgins' face lit up. "Oh, bless you, child. That sounds wonderful." But as Mrs. Higgins continued to count her coins to pay for the toast, she accidentally dropped a quarter. It rolled across the linoleum floor and stopped right next to Brad's shiny Italian leather shoe. Brad, who had just finished his call, looked down at the coin, then at the old woman, and then at his watch. His face twisted into a mask of pure annoyance. "Are you kidding me?" Brad groaned loudly, ensuring the whole diner could hear. "I'm trying to prepare for a multi-million-dollar meeting, and I have to listen to this." "Hey, Grandma," he shouted at Mrs. Higgins. "If you can't afford to eat, go to a soup kitchen. You're blocking the walkway and you're making noise." Mrs. Higgins froze, her face flushing red with humiliation. I'm so sorry, young man. I dropped my quarter." She bent down painfully to retrieve it, but Brad kicked the coin away under the table. "Oops," he smirked cruelly. "Looks like you lost your life savings. Now beat it. People like you ruin the appetite of paying customers." The diner went silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Chloe felt a fire ignite in her chest. She slammed the coffee pot down on the counter loud enough to make Brad jump and walked straight up to him. "Sir," Chloe said, her voice shaking but firm. "Pick it up." Brad laughed, looking around as if looking for an audience. "Excuse me, the waitress is giving me orders now." "I said pick it up," Chloe repeated, staring him in the eye. "You kicked that lady's money. You will apologize and you will pick it up." "I will do no such thing," Brad sneered. "I drive a car worth more than your life. I don't touch dirty floors. And you should be careful. I'm about to buy this building. When I do, the first thing I'm going to do is fire you. In fact, I'll bulldoze this whole place and turn it into a parking lot. So I suggest you go back to pouring coffee before you find yourself on the street with her." Mrs. Higgins was trembling now, clutching her purse. "Please," she whispered to Chloe. "It's okay. I'll just go. I'm not hungry anymore." "No, ma'am," Chloe said gently, turning her back on Brad. "You are not going anywhere." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out her own tips from the morning shift, a wad of crumpled $1 bills, and slammed them on the counter. "Dave," she called to the cook, "get Mrs. Higgins the soup, the sandwich, and a slice of cherry pie, and put it on my tab." She turned back to Brad, her eyes blazing. "You think money makes you better than her? You think a suit makes you a man? This woman has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your whole body." Brad stood up, his face red with rage. "You little ... Is there a problem here?" A deep voice boomed from the doorway. Everyone turned. A tall, uniformed chauffeur in a peaked cap had just entered. He looked around the diner, scanning the room. Brad immediately straightened his tie, assuming this was the arrival of his VIP meeting. "Ah, you must be the driver," Brad said, putting on his fake salesman smile and stepping over Mrs. Higgins to get to the door. "Is she here? Is the owner in the car? Tell her Brad is ready." The chauffeur looked at Brad with confusion, then looked past him. His eyes landed on the little old lady in the oversized cardigan standing by the counter. His face softened into a respectful smile. He walked right past Brad, ignoring his outstretched hand, and stopped in front of Mrs. Higgins. He took off his cap and bowed slightly. "Madam President," the chauffeur said clearly, "the board is waiting for you in the car, but you said you wanted to inspect the property first. Are you ready to go?" Brad laughed nervously. "Buddy, you're confused. That's just some homeless lady. The owner is Mrs. Eleanor Higgins, the CEO of Higgins Holdings." The chauffeur looked at Brad like he was an idiot. "I know who my boss is," he said coldly. Then he turned to the old woman, Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins slowly took off her thick glasses and unbuttoned her shabby cardigan. She handed them to Chloe. Underneath, she wasn't wearing rags. She was wearing a simple but clearly expensive pearl necklace. She straightened her back, the frailty vanishing, replaced by the steel spine of a woman who had built an empire from scratch. "I am ready, James," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice strong and clear. She turned slowly to face Brad, who looked like he had just swallowed a brick. "So," Mrs. Higgins said, looking him up and down, "you're Brad, the man who wants to buy my building." The silence in Daisy's diner was absolute. Even the grill seemed to stop sizzling. Brad stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, his eyes darting from the chauffeur to the homeless woman he had just tormented. His brain was trying to process the impossible information, but the reality was staring him in the face. Mrs. Higgins, the ancient widow he planned to scam, was the very woman whose quarter he had kicked under the table. Mrs. Higgins," Brad stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. I didn't recognize you. I mean the photos, you look so different in the business journals, do I?" Mrs. Higgins asked, her voice deceptively mild. She took a step toward him, and despite being a foot shorter, she seemed to tower over him. "I like to dress down when I visit my properties. Brad, it's the only way to see how things really are, to see how my tenants are managing, to see the quality of the food." She paused, her gaze hardening into ice. "And, occasionally, to see the true character of the people I intend to do business with." Brad let out a nervous, breathless laugh, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Right, of course. Very smart strategy, ma'am. A mystery shopper approach. I love it." He tried to regain his footing, adjusting his tie. "Well, as you can see, this place is a dump. The service is terrible." He gestured accusingly at Chloe, trying to throw her under the bus. "That waitress was extremely rude to me. She threatened a customer. That's why I suggested in my proposal that we tear this down. I can build you a luxury condo tower here that will triple your profits." Mrs. Higgins looked at Chloe, who was standing protectively near the counter. "Rude," Mrs. Higgins repeated. "Is that what you saw, Brad?" "Absolutely," Brad lied, gaining confidence. "She was aggressive. She shouted at me. I was just sitting here quietly preparing for our meeting, and she caused a scene. Honestly, you should evict them just for that." Mrs. Higgins turned to Chloe. "My dear, did you shout at this man?" Chloe looked down, afraid that she really was about to lose her job. I raised my voice. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I just couldn't watch him treat you like that." "She admits it," Brad crowed triumphantly. "See, unprofessional." Mrs. Higgins held up a hand, silencing him instantly. She walked over to the booth where Brad had been sitting, the booth covered in crumbs and papers. She bent down, slowly and deliberately, and reached under the table. She retrieved the quarter Brad had kicked. She stood up, wiped the coin on her sleeve, and placed it gently in her purse. "You know, Brad," Mrs. Higgins began, speaking to the whole room now, "I grew up in a neighborhood just like this. My father was a coal miner. We didn't have much. There were days when we had to count pennies just to buy bread." She looked at the coin in her hand. "I built Higgins Holdings from nothing. I owned skyscrapers, hotels, and shopping malls. But I never forgot what it feels like to be hungry. And I never forgot that the measure of a man is not the size of his wallet, but the size of his heart." She turned on Brad with a ferocity that made him flinch. "You kicked a coin away from an old woman. You mocked someone for being poor. You tried to humiliate a waitress who was working hard to feed a stranger." She took a step closer. "And then you looked me in the eye and lied about it." It was a joke," Brad whispered, realizing he was sinking. "I was just stressed. The deal, There is no deal." Mrs. Higgins cut him off. "I wouldn't sell you a doghouse, let alone this building." Brad's face went pale. "You can't do that. We have a verbal agreement. My firm has spent weeks on the paperwork." "Then your firm wasted its time," Mrs. Higgins replied. "James, call his boss. Tell him the deal is off. And tell him exactly why. Tell him that his star broker enjoys bullying the elderly." Brad gasped. "No, please don't call my boss. He'll fire me. I have a mortgage, I have payments." "You should have thought about that before you treated people like dirt," Mrs. Higgins said coldly. "Now pick up your papers and get out of my building." Brad scrambled to gather his things, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his phone. No one helped him. The patrons watched with grim satisfaction. As he rushed out the door, the chauffeur James stepped in his path for a second, forcing Brad to squeeze past him in shame. The bell jingled as he exited, leaving a silence that was quickly broken by applause. The cook clapped, the customers clapped. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Mrs. Higgins turned back to Chloe, her expression softening instantly into the sweet grandmotherly look from before. "Now," she said, smiling, "about that soup. Is the office still open?" Chloe smiled back, tears in her eyes. "For you, Mrs. Higgins." Always. Mrs. Higgins sat down at the counter, patting the stool next to her. "Sit with me, child. We have business to discuss." Chloe hesitated. "I have to work. Ma'am, I own the building." Mrs. Higgins winked. "I think I can authorize a break." Chloe sat down. Mrs. Higgins took her hand. "You paid for my meal when you thought I had nothing. You defended me when it could have cost you your job. That kind of integrity is rare." "Chloe," she looked around the diner. "Brad was right about one thing. This place is old. It needs a new roof. It needs new equipment." Chloe's heart sank. "So, you are going to sell it?" "No," Mrs. Higgins said firmly. "I'm not selling it, but I am tired of managing it from a distance. I need a partner, someone who loves this place, someone who treats customers like family." She reached into her purse again, but this time, she didn't pull out coins. She pulled out a business card and a pen. She scribbled something on the back. "How long have you worked here, Chloe?" 5 years, ma'am. "And you run the floor better than anyone I've seen. How would you like to run the whole place?" Chloe stared at her. I don't understand." "I'm firing the current management company," Mrs. Higgins announced casually. "They let the roof leak and they let people like Brad think they own the place. I want to give the lease to you, Chloe, rent-free for the first 2 years. You keep the profits, you fix it up, you run it your way." Chloe stared at Mrs. Higgins, the sounds of the diner fading into a dull buzz in the background. "Me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Own the business, Mrs. Higgins. I have $40 in my bank account. I can't run a business. I don't know anything about contracts or suppliers." Mrs. Higgins laughed softly and patted Chloe's hand. "You know the most important thing, my dear. You know people. You know that Mrs. Johnson in booth 2 needs her tea with honey because of her throat. You know that the man in the corner is lonely and needs a smile. You have the heart. I can hire lawyers and accountants to teach you the rest." She placed the card in Chloe's palm and closed her fingers over it. "Consider it an investment. I'm investing in you. Because today, you invested in me when you thought I was a bad investment." Chloe looked down at the card through blurred vision. Tears finally spilled over, hot and fast. This wasn't just a job promotion. This was a lifeline. This was her daughter's tuition. This was a future where she didn't have to count every penny. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much." Mrs. Higgins stood up and adjusted her pearl necklace. "Don't thank me yet. Running a diner is hard work. Now, get me that slice of cherry pie. I've heard it's the best in the city, and I can actually pay for it this time." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of joy. When Mrs. Higgins finally left, escorted by James into a sleek black limousine parked right in front of the window, Chloe watched her go with a heart full of hope. But the story of karma wasn't quite finished. 2 days later, a news crew arrived at Daisy's diner. The story of the waitress and the billionaire had leaked, likely thanks to the cook, Dave, who couldn't keep a secret. The segment aired on the local evening news. They showed Chloe smiling and humble, talking about kindness. They showed the diner packed with new customers who wanted to support the hero waitress, and in a brief segment they mentioned a certain local real estate broker who had been fired for unethical conduct. Brad's face was blurred, but everyone in town knew who it was. Brad didn't just lose the deal, he lost his reputation. In the real estate world, trust is everything, and no one wanted to hire the guy who bullied old ladies. He ended up moving to towns over, working at a used car lot. A job where he had to stand on his feet all day, giving him plenty of time to think about how it felt to be on the other side of the service counter. 6 months later, Daisy's diner had a grand reopening. It was renamed Chloe's Kitchen. The roof was fixed, the vinyl seats were new, but the soul of the place remained the same. On opening day, the line stretched around the block. Inside, in the best booth by the window, the one Brad used to hog-set Mrs. Higgins, she had a permanent reservation. A small brass plaque on the wall next to the booth read, "Reserved for the boss." Chloe, now wearing a smart manager's blazer over her dress, walked over with a pot of coffee. She didn't have to serve tables anymore, but for this customer she always would. "Coffee, Mrs. Higgins?" Chloe asked, beaming. Mrs. Higgins looked up from her cherry pie. "Only if you join me, partner." Chloe slid into the booth opposite the woman who had changed her life. They looked out the window at the busy street. "You know," Mrs. Higgins said thoughtfully, "people think power is about shouting orders and wearing expensive suits. But look at this place. Look at these people. They are happy because they feel safe here. That is real power, Chloe. The power to create a sanctuary." Chloe nodded. "I learned from the best." Just then, a young man entered the diner. He looked nervous, checking his pockets, clearly counting money. He looked hungry. Chloe saw him from the booth. She didn't wait. She excused herself, walked over to him, and flashed a warm smile. "Table for one?" she asked. I'm just checking the prices, the young man mumbled, embarrassed. Chloe remembered the feeling. She remembered the fear. Don't worry about the prices today, she said, loud enough for Mrs. Higgins to hear and smile. We have a special, the soup is on the house. The legacy of kindness continued because Chloe knew that you don't pay kindness back, you pay it forward. And in a small diner on the corner of Main Street, that currency was worth more than all the gold in the world. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that one small act of kindness can change a destiny, please share it with your friends and family. Let's make kindness go viral. Don't forget to subscribe to Her Secrets, Her Stories for more inspiring tales where the good guys finally win.